An interview with the Prince of Wales. In one of his rare talks for publication, Europe's most attractive young man tells an American how he manages to work harder than any other man in England, and yet to keep his youth, health, and mental alertness. What he does during the 24 hours of his crowded day. By Lloyd Morris. McCall's Magazine, June 1924. A few years ago, we in the United States had a brief opportunity to see Europe's most attractive young man when he paid a flying visit to this country. He came very simply, abandoning his official status whenever he could, and proceeded thoroughly to enjoy his stay here, much as his grandfather did on a similar visit 50 years earlier. In the short time that he was in the United States, the Prince of Wales endeared himself, quite without effort, to the American public. And it may be added that the prince reciprocates the sentiment, and is looking forward to coming to see us again. It is easy to understand, after you have met him, why the prince is universally popular. He is a clean-cut, clear-eyed, rosy-cheeked young man, whose engaging manner and jaunty appearance emphasize a large reserve of quiet ability. He is unpretentious and simple, and democratic in his tastes. He dislikes formality and rigid etiquette, though he accepts them, when necessary, as being part of the obligations of his official position. He has an inexhaustible capacity for enjoying himself under any circumstances, and is never bored. He works hard and plays hard. When you look at the Prince of Wales, you instinctively feel that he is capable of meeting any emergency and rising to any situation. His eager, flashing eyes, his cordiality and good fellowship, and above all his modesty, drive home a distinctive personal charm. There is nothing self-conscious or affected about the Prince of Wales. He is warm-hearted, impulsive, enthusiastic, fun-loving, and boyish. As a human being, he is, to use an old but very apt phrase, really a prince. There is an aspect of the Prince of Wales' character that is practically unknown to the general public. A good deal has been written about him, but it has hardly ever been pointed out that the prince is an exceedingly hard-working, industrious, and serious-minded young man, who is carrying through with unmistakable success a trying and difficult job. Who is the hardest-working man in England today? If the question were asked of any Englishman, the reply undoubtedly would be the Prince of Wales. For Great Britain's future king has probably less leisure time than any other man in the United Kingdom. The 8-hour day and the 6-day week do not exist for him. His day may comprise anywhere from 10 to 18 closely packed hours. His average program, punctiliously and punctually adhered to, would rapidly exhaust even the most energetic and tireless man of business. It is precisely this condition of affairs which explains the prince's phenomenal popularity among all classes of his countrymen. The British are keenly aware that their future sovereign is perpetually on the job. They respect his industry and his extraordinary application. And his duties are far more formidable than even his crowded days would suggest. In a measure, to use a term made familiar by the war, the prince acts as a liaison between the House of Windsor and the people of the Empire. He is constantly before the British public, and if few men have less leisure, few certainly have less opportunity to relax into private life. In many respects, the prince is the most accessible man in Great Britain today. Apparently, he never refuses his personal attention or his presence where the slightest tangible claim upon them exists. Only a condition of superlative physical fitness could possibly enable the prince to cope with his program. He is almost never ill, and he appears to be indefatigable. He is exceedingly fond of dancing, and the end of a long, hard day frequently finds him at some dance looking quite as fresh as though his day had just begun. He spends his energies unstintingly, taking few, if any, of even the casual precautions which a busy man in a responsible position finds necessary. The pertinacity with which he exposed himself to danger during the war was a source of incessant apprehension to the British command. The prince's rejoinder to the suggestion that, as future ruler of the empire, he guard himself more carefully was characteristic. "Why worry about me?" he asked. "I have many brothers." And he carries the same attitude into his peacetime life. It was only last winter that the British press became agitated by the prince's proclivity for courting risks while in the saddle. And it is worth noting that his venturesome attitude has been in no way modified by any suggestion of restraint from whatever quarter it may have emanated. His independence is as characteristic as his gameness. My audience with the prince took place appropriately at Olympia in London, where the annual International Horse Show was being held. It was the afternoon of the competition by British, French, Belgian, and Italian teams for the Prince of Wales Cup. The prince came to Olympia to witness the competition and bestow the cup upon the winning team. His entry into the royal box was the signal for a prolonged burst of spontaneous enthusiasm. The prince's punctuality is proverbial. He rarely postpones an engagement, and he is never late. In a few moments, exactly according to schedule, I was summoned to the prince's box. There is, I believe, a prescribed and formal etiquette governing presentation to the Prince of Wales. I had no opportunity to put it into practice. At the door leading to the box, I was received by Lord Lonsdale, who was to introduce me to the prince. But before any introduction could be effected, the prince had arisen from his chair, stepped into the anteroom, and had quickly greeted me with outstretched hand and a "Very glad to know you, sir." His movements have the agility and precision of the disciplined athlete. Slight of frame and youthful, even boyish in appearance, he suggests not muscular force, but perfect control. The personality of this slender young man with the large, serious eyes and ready, winning smile is singularly magnetic. People in England frequently compare him with his grandfather, King Edward. But what distinguishes him immediately, however, is his complete informality. In this quality, he is unlike most men in public life in Europe today, for he possesses the secret of concealing a veritable dignity beneath a perfectly natural and spontaneous manner. To meet the Prince of Wales is, for an American, to be reminded of meeting Theodore Roosevelt. Like Roosevelt, the prince manages to establish an instantaneous contact with the person to whom he is talking. His handclasp is vigorous, his greeting intimately responsive, and his interest in what you have to say to him is unmistakably sincere. The prince's first remark was characteristically unassuming. Why, he asked, write about me? But when I explained that my interest was in his participation in sports and in the means which he employs to keep himself in good physical trim, his eyes flashed and his interest quickened. It was evident that we had embarked upon a subject close to the prince's heart, for he proceeded to interview the interviewer. "Have you been over long enough to see any polo?" he asked. "There are some very good games coming off in a few days. You had better go down to see some of them." Yet, for all his enthusiasm for polo, the prince later told me that he regards his sports purely as a means of maintaining his physical fitness, and contrives to fit them into his program so as to assure himself a certain amount of exercise each day. "When I am in London," said the prince, "my day begins with an hour or more of squash or calisthenics, followed by a swim or a cold plunge. I try to make this an invariable rule. This, in fact, may be called the irreducible minimum of what the prince believes to be necessary as daily exercise. No matter how crowded his program, he seldom relinquishes this hour in the gymnasium. If absolutely necessary, he rises at a very early hour in order to fit it in. This hour, as he said, works out his muscles sufficiently to condition him for a long and often wholly sedentary day. The sports in which riding is an element are those which the prince especially prefers. When I asked him to name his favorite sport, the answer came quickly. "That's easy," he said with a smile. "Hunting, of course. It's Lord Lonsdale's favorite sport too, isn't it? But he's better at it than I am," the prince added quickly with a deprecating grin. For indoor games of any kind, the prince has little fondness. He is, however, devoted to dancing, perhaps because it too is a form of exercise. "I suppose that dancing is my major indoor sport," he told me. "We dance over here quite as much, I believe, as you do in America, and we get all your new steps just as quickly as we can. I'm very fond of the American dances, and I never tire of dancing, especially if I have good partners." I asked the prince what proportion of time, in his opinion, a man or woman should devote to exercise in order to keep in thoroughly fit condition. "All the time they can," the prince answered. "The real point, however, is not the amount of time one spends in exercise or sports, but the regularity and consistency with which one takes them on. Nor does it make much difference what form of exercise one takes. All forms are beneficial. Some form of violent exercise, such as squash or handball, is an excellent antidote to fatigue. It limbers up the body and develops energy. But if a man or woman spends an hour a day with consistent regularity and vigorous exercise, he or she can bring themselves into good physical condition and maintain that condition under a high pressure of work. The ideal thing, the prince added, is to cultivate a variety of sports for the special benefits to be derived from each of them. That is the method which I personally employ to keep fit. But with a limited amount of time at one's disposal, one should plan for a minimum amount of exercise daily and adhere to that plan, increasing the amount of time as one finds the opportunity to do so. In these days when so many people are engaged in exclusively sedentary occupations, we cannot too often remind ourselves of the absolute necessity for physical culture. Sports of all kinds are good things in themselves, but they serve a much more important function than that of amusement. They are really a means for fitting men and women for the increasing burdens and responsibilities of life. Such is the Prince of Wales' recipe for keeping fit. As he gave my hand a firm grip in leave-taking, I looked at the erect, agile figure of Great Britain's future king, clear-eyed and vigorous, and I understood how it is that, though he is one of the hardest-working men in England, he is undaunted by his job and unperturbed by the future.